Okay, imagine this. You're in a seminar, right? Professional development. Pretty calm room.
Right.
And suddenly the guy across the table, a Harvard law professor no less, just leans in and says, we've got your son, Voss. Give us $1 million or he dies.
Wow. Okay.
What do you do? I mean, the guy in the story, he was an FBI agent, 20 years experience negotiating lives, and his first reaction, just like sheer panic.
Even knowing it wasn't real, it was just a role play.
Exactly, it's a role play. But that fear, it was totally real, and it kind of highlights this fundamental thing about, well, about how we interact. So that's what we're doing today, a deep dive into that exact thing. This huge shift in how we think about negotiation.
Yeah, because for ages, the main idea was all logic, rational problem solving, math, economics, the stuff you learned in fancy schools.
The Ivy League approach, right?
Right. But what the sources we looked at show is that, well, something else emerged, something way more effective, actually. It's rooted in emotional intelligence, psychology, crisis intervention even.
Interesting.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the key insights, the surprising bits from these sources, give you a kind of shortcut to understanding how the FBI figured out how to, well, win in these really high-stakes situations.
It's not just what they did, but why it worked.
Exactly. And crucially, how you can use these same ideas in your own life. Because it's about being effective, really, not just about being right.
Okay, so let's get into that. The old way, the getting to yes model. It was big, even in the FBI for a while.
Yeah, dominant paradigm.
Seeing negotiation as just like a logical puzzle to solve, all reason, math. Find the common ground. Found sensible. So where did it fall down?
Well, the big challenge came from psychology, actually. Guys like Kahneman and Tversky, they spent decades showing that, we humans, we're not fully rational, and we're not completely selfish either.
That feels true.
Right, and they proved it. They talked about cognitive bias. These are like unconscious, irrational shortcuts our brains take that literally warp how we see reality. And they found loads of them, over 150. These biases just run in the background.
Wow. Okay. So they also talked about system 1 and system 2 thinking, didn't they?
Exactly. System 1 is your gut reaction, fast, emotional, intuitive. System 2 is the slower, deliberate, logical part.
And the source made a great point about this, trying to negotiate using only system 2, the logic part, without understanding the system 1 emotions underneath. It's like trying to make an omelet without cracking the eggs first.
Precisely. You're missing the fundamental first step. You have to deal with the emotion, the system 1 stuff, before the logic can even land.
Okay, so that makes sense. And that leads us to the FBI realizing this, right? Back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, their hostage negotiation team started seeing that the standard getting to yes approach, well, it just wasn't cutting it. Something really important was missing when they were dealing with people under intense pressure.
So what did they do? If the logical path wasn't working, where did they turn?
This is where it gets really interesting. Because you had two paths diverging. The traditional negotiation world, the Ivy Leagues, they kept going down the rational economics road.
Right.
But the FBI guys, the source calls them the meatheads, kind of paradoxically, they started training agents in this unproven system based on psychology, counseling, crisis intervention.
He's a completely different.
Totally. While the universities taught math, the FBI became experts in empathy. And, well, the proof was simple. Their way worked. It just flat out worked better in those real-world high-stakes scenarios.
And it really had to work for them, didn't it? I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher.
Absolutely. Think about it. A hostage negotiator must win. You can't compromise. You can't say, okay, you've got 4 hostages, just give us 2 back. No way.
Yeah, no splitting the difference there.
You have to get everything you need, give almost nothing significant back, but here's the kicker. You have to leave the other person feeling like you've built a great relationship.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It's emotional intelligence on steroids, as the source puts it.
Yeah.
That's the level they operate on.
Okay, so if we want to learn from this, maybe not negotiating hostages, but, in our jobs, our lives, what are the first tools? Where do we start?
Foundationally, it all starts with active listening. And that means more than just being quiet. It's about shutting down your own assumptions, talking way less, listening way more, really opening up your senses to what's being said. And maybe even more importantly, what's not being said.
Just paying attention, basically.
Deep attention. And one technique they use to help with this is pretty cool. It's called the late night FM DJ voice.
Okay, what's that?
Think of that calm, soothing voice, usually inflecting downwards at the end of sentences. It slows the whole interaction down. It makes the other person feel safer, more likely to open up.
Makes sense. Creates a calm space.
Exactly. And you combine that with using silences strategically, just pausing. People feel the need to fill the silence, and often they'll reveal things they wouldn't have otherwise.
Okay. DJ voice, silence. What else? There's something called mirroring. Isopraxism.
Yeah, mirroring. It's basically conscious imitation. And in the FBI context, it's often super simple. Just repeat the last 3 words, or maybe the 1 to 3 most critical words the other person just said.
Repeat their words back to them.
Yeah. Sounds weird, maybe. But it taps into this deep biological thing. We instinctively trust people who are like us. Mirroring subtly signals, hey, we're on the same wavelength. It builds rapport incredibly fast.
Okay. But does it feel fake? Like you're just mimicking them? Could it backfire?
That's a fair question. The source calls it the closest thing to a Jedi mind trick because it's so simple yet effective. But it's not about being manipulative. It's actually a sign you're listening so closely that you're reflecting what you hear. It validates them.
Okay, validation. I get that.
There's a great little story about a student using this. Her boss says, let's make 2 copies of all the paperwork. She just calmly mirrors 2 copies.
Okay.
He then said something like, yeah, just store it anywhere. And she mirrors again, calmly, anywhere.
Ah, questioning the vagueness.
Exactly. And that pause, that gentle mirroring, made him pause and realize, wait, no, not anywhere. He then explained what he actually needed digital backups for a new assistant. Totally different from just 2 copies stored anywhere.
Wow. Just from repeating a few words.
Yeah. And there was research done. A psychologist named Richard Wiseman studied waiters. He found mirroring, just repeating orders back, created a better connection and got bigger tips than waiters using positive reinforcement, like great choice.
Okay, I'm sold on mirroring. It's like an instant connection tool.
Definitely. And that leads into the next layer, which is tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy. Sounds serious.
It is, but it's not about sympathy or agreeing with the other person. You might think their position is totally off the wall. Tactical empathy is about understanding their perspective, seeing the world through their eyes, enough to build trust.
Seeing their side, even if you don't agree with it.
Precisely. And brain scans actually show this. Good listeners' brains literally start to align, show similar activity patterns to the speaker's brain. They call it neural resonance.
That's wild. Okay, so how do you do tactical empathy?
A key tool is labeling. This is where you actively name the emotion you sense in the other person.
So you'd say something like, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or it seems like you're worried about X. You're giving their feeling a name, validating it. It builds intimacy really fast. It's like an emotional hack.
Why is that so powerful? Just naming an emotion.
Because bringing a negative emotion out into the open, giving it a name, makes it less scary, less overwhelming. It diffuses its power.
Okay, got it. Shine a light on the monster under the bed.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
There's an example of a sales guy, TJ, working with people who hadn't paid for their season tickets. His first script was aggressive, demanding, didn't work. Right, so he rewrote it. He started using labels, acknowledging their situation. Things like, it sounds like you're going through tough economic times, or acknowledging the stress involved. He wasn't excusing it, just labeling the likely feelings.
Then that worked.
Huge difference. It diffused the negativity, opened the door, and he ended up setting up payment plans with everyone. Made the CFO happy.
That's a great example. And I like the one about the teacher needing volunteers, too.
Oh, yeah, that's brilliant. Instead of just asking and getting silence, the teacher would say something like, okay, I need volunteers for this role play. And just so you know, in case you're worried, it's going to be horrible.
Uh-huh. Just naming the fear.
Exactly. It labeled their potential fear and reluctance, used humor, disarmed it completely. And they always got tons of volunteers. It shows how trying to deny the negative, like saying, I don't want this to sound harsh,
Yeah.
actually makes it worse.
Right, because the next thing is always harsh.
Always. So this leads to another tactic, the accusation audit.
Accusation audit. Sounds like preparing for court.
Kind of. It's where you proactively list out all the negative things the other person might be thinking or feeling about you or your proposal right at the start.
You say the bad stuff first about yourself.
Yeah. You basically disarm them by voicing their unspoken accusations. You probably think I'm being opportunistic, or you might feel like we're trying to rush you. By bringing it up yourself, you show you're aware, you're not hiding anything, and it takes the sting out of it. It builds trust incredibly fast.
Okay, that's counterintuitive, but makes sense. You're controlling the narrative on the negatives.
Exactly. So we've talked about listening, empathy, labeling. Often the goal seems to be getting to yes. But the sources argue that yes isn't always the gold standard we think it is.
Right. They said yes can be worthless. Or even a counterfeit dodge.
Yeah, think about those annoying telemarketer scripts designed to get you saying yes over and over.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're actually committed or agreeing in a meaningful way.
True. You're just trying to get them off the phone.
So the real goal, the sign of true understanding and buy-in, isn't yes. It's when the other person says, that's right.
That's right. Why is that so much better?
Because that's signals that you've articulated their perspective, their feelings, their situation so well that they feel completely understood. It's an affirmation of their worldview. That's where real commitment starts.
Ah, okay. It's deeper than just agreement. It's recognition.
Totally. There's a great story about a football linebacker, Brandon. He was underperforming. His coach finally sat him down and labeled his hidden belief. It seems like you think it's unmanly to dodge a block, like it's cowardly to get out of the way.
Oof. Direct.
Yeah. And Brandon just paused, looked at the coach, and said, that's right. And in that moment, something clicked. He acknowledged the core issue, and from then on, he changed his approach and became a great player. That's right, was the breakthrough.
That's powerful. It's like a light bulb moment.
Exactly. And we see it elsewhere, too. A pharma sales rep finally got a skeptical doctor on side. Not by pushing product features, but by summarizing the doctor's passion for his patients and the frustrations of his practice so accurately that the doctor said, that's right. Only then was he open to hearing how her product might help.
So summary leads to, that's right, which leads to openness.
Precisely. Or the student who got a job by summarizing his ex-boss's situation and motivations so well that the boss said, that's right, revealing he really needed an ally back at HQ. That's right confirmed the understanding and sealed the deal.
It makes me think of that Chinese saying, sleeping in the same bed but dreaming different dreams.
That's a perfect analogy. That's what happens with superficial yeses. You think you're aligned, but you're not. That's right. Means you're actually dreaming the same dream, at least for that moment.
Okay, so strive for, that's right. Now, another really counterintuitive idea from the sources is about the word no. We usually try to avoid hearing no, right?
We do. We're conditioned to see no as rejection, as failure. But the FBI approach flips this. They argue that no is actually often where the real negotiation begins.
How so?
Because saying no makes the speaker feel safe. It gives them a sense of control. Think about it when you feel pressured to say yes, you feel trapped. Saying no is an assertion of autonomy. It's protection.
Yeah, I can see that. Like hanging up on that telemarketer finally feels good because you took back control.
Exactly. So letting someone say no can actually relax them, make them feel secure enough to listen properly. And the sources argue that no always changes the conversation. It creates a pause, a shift, a safe haven from which you can actually work towards real agreement.
But doesn't it risk just ending the conversation? No, I'm not interested. End of story.
It can, if handled badly. But often, an early yes is fake, like we said. A no means they're engaged enough to disagree to assert themselves. It's a real position you can work with.
Okay, example.
Well, the source author, Voss, tells his own story. Early on, he wanted to join the FBI's negotiation team in New York. He went to the team lead, Amy Bondreau, and said, I want in. She asked about his training experience. He had none. No, no, no.
So she said no.
Pretty much. She told him to go volunteer at a suicide hotline first. Then said, no guarantees. Now seriously, go away. It was a firm no to his immediate request. But he actually did the volunteering, came back months later, and surprised her. She said basically nobody ever follows through on that advice. That initial no was actually the start of him proving himself.
Ah, so the no was a challenge, a filter. Interesting.
And there's another one about political fundraising. They found a script that started with a question designed to get a no worked way better. Something like, do you feel that if things stay the way they are, America's best days are ahead of it? Most target donors would say no.
And that no opened them up.
Yeah, got them engaged on an emotional level, agreeing on a problem before asking for money. Started with no to get to yes.
Okay, that's definitely flipping the script. So how do we get information and influence things without being pushy or asking direct why questions that put people on the defensive?
That's where calibrated questions come in. These are the secret sauce. They mostly start with how or what.
Not why.
Generally avoid why. Why tends to sound accusatory, makes people justify themselves. Why did you do that? Puts them on the back foot. But what makes you ask? Or how am I supposed to do that? these are different.
How are they different?
How and what questions implicitly ask for help. They give the other person the feeling of control, the illusion of control, because you're asking them to solve the problem or explain their thinking. But you are the one framing the question, guiding the conversation.
So you guide them, but they feel like they're driving.
Exactly. And it encourages them to talk, often revealing really important information. Plus, a killer technique is using, how am I supposed to do that, as a way of saying no, gently.
How does that work?
Instead of rejecting their demand outright, you ask them to solve your problem. You want me to pay X, but the budget is Y. How am I supposed to do that? It forces them to consider your constraints, to look for alternative solutions. Often, they end up negotiating against themselves.
That's clever, like making them find the solution that works for you.
Yeah. There's an example of a drug dealer whose girlfriend was kidnapped. He didn't demand proof of life. He asked the kidnapper, using street slang, "Hey, dog, how do I know she's all right?"
Putting the onus on the kidnapper.
Right. The kidnapper then paused and volunteered proof of life, thinking it was his own idea to offer reassurance. The how question got the result without a direct confrontation.
Smart. Any other examples?
Yeah, a patient threatening to leave a hospital against medical advice. The doctor didn't argue. He asked calibrated questions like, what do you hope to accomplish by leaving? The patient, forced to think it through, realized leaving wouldn't solve his underlying problem and stayed.
The question made him see the flaw in his own plan.
Exactly. Or the student dealing with a client who owed money. Instead of demanding payment, she asked, how am I supposed to do that? Referring to accepting the delay. The client immediately apologized, explained internal issues, and promised payment in 48 hours, which happened. The how question triggered empathy and problem solving.
Okay, calibrated questions are powerful. Now, you mentioned getting to that's right, but the source has also stressed that agreement isn't the end goal, right?
Absolutely critical point. A yes, or even a that's right, means nothing if the agreement can't actually be implemented. The negotiator's job isn't just getting the deal, it's being a decision architect. You have to design an agreement that works in the real world.
So thinking about the how of making it happen.
Yes. There's a stark example from a prison siege. Negotiators spent ages crafting this careful surrender ritual involving inmates using walkie-talkies. But then a SWAT officer, who wasn't briefed on the specifics, just grabbed a walkie-talkie from the first inmate coming out, completely disrupting the agreed-upon process.
Ouch. Undermine the whole thing.
Instantly. It shows how vital it is to understand and manage the implementation phase. Everyone involved needs to know the how.
And this often involves people who aren't even in the room, right? The behind-the-table players.
Exactly. Very few negotiations are just one-on-one. There are almost always hidden influencers, bosses, committees, spouses, people who can kill the deal later. Level 2 players, the source calls them.
So how do you deal with them?
You have to actively uncover their influence and motivations. Use calibrated questions again. Ask things like, how does this decision affect the rest of your team? Or how will you sell this internally? Or how on board are the people who aren't on this call? You need to understand the whole ecosystem of the decision.
Thinking multiple steps ahead. This brings us to uncovering hidden stuff, which the sources call black swans.
Yes, black swans. These aren't just unlikely events. They are pieces of information that are completely outside your current frame of reference. Things you never even imagined could be factors. But if you uncover one, it can totally change the game.
Why black swans?
Well, the story goes, the Europeans only ever saw white swans for centuries. So a black swan was shorthand for something impossible. Then explorers actually found black swans in Australia in the late 1600s. Boom! The impossible became real. That's the idea, discovering something that fundamentally shifts your understanding.
Okay. And missing them can be disastrous.
Definitely. The source gives a tragic example of a bank robbery standoff. The negotiators missed several black swans about the robber, Griffin. He wasn't demanding money, which was weird. He had a history of homicide they didn't fully register. There was a hidden, threatening line in a note he sent out. None of these clicked as game-changing unknowns.
And the outcome was bad.
Fatal, yeah. It
Right.
underscores the point. Finding black swans means you have to be open, really listening intuitively, challenging your own assumptions. Because what you don't know can kill you or your deal.
So you need a mindset shift to even look for them.
Absolutely. You have to be willing to question everything.
This ties into how we often react when things seem irrational, right? We just label the other side crazy.
Yeah, that's such a common trap. Oh, they're just crazy. We see it in big policy debates, like dealing with terrorists, and we see it in everyday negotiations. But the source argues that the exact moment you're tempted to call someone crazy is probably the best time to pause and look for a black swan.
Because the craziness is actually a clue.
It's often a clue that you're missing something important. According to some research mentioned, like in the book Negotiation Genius, this crazy behavior usually happens for a couple of reasons. Either they're acting on bad information, garbage in, garbage out.
GI right.
Right. Or they have hidden constraints or desires they're maybe embarrassed or unable to admit. Like the example of the Coca-Cola executive who just went silent. He wasn't crazy, his division was in chaos, and he'd lost internal clout. He was constrained.
So crazy is just a label for behavior we don't understand yet.
Pretty much. And the way to understand it, to find those black swans, is to figure out their religion.
Their religion? You mean literally?
Not necessarily literal religion, though sometimes it could be. It means understanding their core worldview, their fundamental drivers, their reason for being. What deeply motivates them. You have to get beyond the surface issues and into their emotional landscape.
Okay, understanding their underlying why.
Exactly. Think about the farmer, Watson, who drove his tractor to Washington, D.C. and threatened to blow it up. People thought he was crazy, but his religion was protesting government policies hurting farmers like him. He wanted to be heard.
So the FBI used that?
Yeah. They understood his core motivation wasn't suicide, it was protest. They leveraged his desire to be heard and ultimately his desire to live to end the standoff peacefully after 48 hours. They understood his religion.
And this all connects back to building trust, right? The similarity principle.
Definitely. We are just wired to trust people we see as similar to us. Birds of a feather flock together. So all this active listening, empathy, understanding their worldview, it helps establish that common ground, that feeling of similarity, which makes you more influential.
Okay, so understanding emotions, building trust. How do we then actively maybe bend reality a bit? Leverage these emotions?
This is where prospect theory comes in again. Remember, decisions are driven by emotion even if we rationalize them later. And a key finding is loss aversion. People are more motivated to avoid a loss than to achieve an equivalent gain. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good.
Right. We hate losing.
Deeply. So you can use this. Anchor their emotions by framing things in terms of potential loss. The source mentions offering someone $500. If you just offer it, it might feel insulting depending on the context. But if you frame it as, this is how you avoid losing $500 that would otherwise go to someone else, suddenly it feels like a gain because you've anchored them to the idea of a loss.
Clever framing, playing on that aversion.
And another huge emotional lever is the concept of fairness. The source calls fair the most powerful word in negotiation.
More powerful than money.
Often, yes, because we are intensely driven by feeling respected, feeling treated fairly. Brain scans show specific areas light up when we perceive unfairness. Even monkeys get upset about it. Remember the capuchins rejecting a cucumber when another got a grape?
Huh. Yeah, the unfair cucumber.
It's primal. And think about the ultimatum game in economics. People will reject a small amount of free money, choosing $0 over $1 if they feel the offer is insultingly unfair. The emotional offense outweighs the rational gain.
So appealing to fairness or highlighting unfairness is crucial.
Absolutely. Now, another tactical point, letting the other side make the first offer, letting them anchor first.
Really? I thought you were supposed to anchor high.
That's common advice, but if you're well prepared, letting them go first gives you valuable information. You see their starting point, their expectations. You just have to be ready to handle it if they throw out an extreme number.
Like Mike Tyson's quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Exactly. You need the psychological resilience to take that initial punch, that extreme anchor, without flinching or immediately adjusting your own goals based on their number.
Okay, so withstand the anchor, gather the info.
Yeah. There's a detailed story about buying a truck. The negotiator let the dealer make offer after offer. He used silence, non-round numbers for his own eventual offers, polite refusals like, how am I supposed to do that? And just let the dealer slowly bid against himself, coming down thousands from the initial asking price.
Patience and technique.
And discipline. It also highlights another tactic, pleasant persistence on non-salary terms.
So focusing on things other than just the money.
Right. Sometimes you hit a wall on salary or price. But discussing other terms, vacation time, responsibilities, payment schedules, can open up new possibilities. And sometimes, if they can't meet your non-monetary request, they might actually increase the money offer to compensate.
Like the French student asking for more vacation.
Exactly. She kept politely asking for an extra week of vacation. The company said they were handcuffed on vacation policy. But because she was so pleasant and persistent, and they wanted her, they ended up boosting her salary offer instead.
Nice. So persistence pays if it's pleasant.
The key is present persistence. The overall goal, though, is always to avoid a showdown. You want to disagree without being disagreeable.
There's a quote about that, right?
Yeah, Robert Estabrook. He who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation. It's about maintaining that connection, giving them the illusion of control, even when you're pushing back or holding firm.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what's the big picture takeaway from the FBI's approach?
It's really a fundamental shift, isn't it? Moving away from negotiation is just a logical exercise, and deeply embracing the power of human emotion, empathy, active listening, and understanding those hidden drivers. It shows how these sometimes seemingly simple techniques can be incredibly powerful in really complex, high-stakes situations.
And for you listening, the point is these aren't just spy tricks or things for billion-dollar deals or hostage situations. These skills, listening better, understanding perspective, using empathy tactically, asking better questions, they apply everywhere.
Absolutely. In your job negotiations, dealing with colleagues, even in personal relationships, they give you tools to influence, persuade, and just connect better with people in almost any situation.
So maybe a final thought to leave people with.
Well, perhaps it's this. Success in negotiation, and maybe in life, isn't really about being right. It's more about being willing to adapt your approach, to constantly learn, to look beneath the surface for those constraints and hidden desires in others, and maybe in yourself too. And understanding that pretty much every interaction we have is a kind of mini negotiation, a small conflict. But if we manage them well with these kinds of skills, they don't have to be negative. They can actually lead to something creative, something better than where we started, maybe even a kind of creative beauty.